My name is Douglas Kirchhofer, and today is April 5th. The time is 5:05, and we are at St. John's Northwestern Military Academy. I am interviewing Mr. John Eskau. He was born on May 26, 1927, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He served in World War II and Korea between 1944 and 1954. John Eskau was a Seaman First Class cook in the United States Navy and served as a gunner and a cook. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. Alright, so John, so let's start off with the beginning. At what point did you really decide that you wanted to join the service, and what was a major push behind that want to join?
Well, we were all a bunch of kids, Depression type, back in the 30s and 40s. And when the war broke out and Pearl Harbor was attacked, we were still paper boys out delivering our papers. We got the news that we were to report to our paper stations because Pearl Harbor was attacked. Well, exactly 2.5 years later, I was in the United States Navy. I joined up and went to Great Lakes for boot camp. And from there, they shipped me to the West Coast. And when we got out there, it was at Shoemaker, California, and they divided us up. Some of us were put on destroyers. The rest of us were sent to amphibious school down in San Diego, California, where we trained with landing boats and every day we went out in the ocean and brought the troops in and landed them on the beach. This was a practice session to find out what would happen with these boats in case a surf turned them over, and we went out in all kinds of weather to test it. And while I was there, I was ready to go to Iwo Jima. And I went on Liberty, and I come back, and I contacted scarlet fever, so I didn't go to Iwo Jima. So then they put me back to retrain me, and they put me on another troop ship and heading for Pearl Harbor to meet a convoy. Well, I got out to Pearl Harbor, and they put us up in a tent city for the night. And while I was in the tent city, I got bit by a poisonous spider, put me back in the hospital. So my whole group left without me again. So I said, well, gee, I probably won't even see the war. Well, I went out of the hospital and I said, I want to go in town and see what Hawaii looks like. So I got a 1-day Liberty. The following day, I was on a convoy heading out in the Pacific for Okinawa. And we arrived, it was a matter of days with a convoy. And we stopped at Inuitak in the Marshall Islands, and then we went to the Tinian, where they had the B-29s, and they were taking off every day to bomb Japan. And these planes were huge. These were the last big bombers they built. And we'd watch them take off in the morning, and they'd be gone, and then they'd come back at night. Well, on this one flight, they hit a headwind on the way back. And they ran out of fuel. With a lot of these B-29s ended up in the ocean. And that was a disaster from the war, but they couldn't predict what that was going to happen. Well, anyhow, we knew they were doing a job there ahead of us, so we wouldn't have to face that possibly. So we did make the landings at Okinawa, and our convoy was hit with 6 suicide planes the morning we hit. And I was on the guns firing at them. And then they took us and launched us off this top of this LST, and we were on that landing craft for the next year doing service, hauling troops, hauling ammo, and patrolling the island. And it was a real adventurous type of life because we never knew from day to day what would be coming next. And then we were getting ready to invade mainland Japan, and we knew we would be having a big battle because we had a battle that took us probably 3-4 months to conquer Okinawa, and we were going to proceed to Japan, and then they dropped the bomb and decided on the 14th of August everybody was firing off their rifles and celebrating. So I went up to headquarters and I called up and I said, "What's going on?" He says, "We're discussing peace terms with the Japanese. Shoot them down in a friendly manner." Which we did. But anyhow, a couple of our ships got hit that night yet when they were still talking. I think the battleship Pennsylvania got hit and killed a couple hundred guys. But firing up all those shells, I says, "Man, I'm not going to stand out in the open because that stuff goes up, it comes down." And there was about 7 guys killed by our own stuff going up in the air. So disasters happen. But anyhow, from there, we stayed on that island. I was there for 6 months, and then they were going to send us either to Japan for occupation forces or Korea or China. Well, they finally decided to tow us up into Korea, and I spent the whole winter there supplying the army. And that was quite a job because we weren't equipped for cold weather. Our ship had no insulation on it. So with our ingenuity, we found a bunch of lumber and built a cabin right where we used to have a tank, put an oil burner in it, and that's how we lived through the winter in Korea. Well, I was still pretty young and they wouldn't let me go home yet. This was a year almost after the war ended. They sent me to China, and I got involved in the China Civil War. We were hauling troops for Chiang Kai-shek up into Manchuria to fight Moti's son. We weren't supposed to be there, but we were there. So that was part of the history of my Navy life in World War II.
Lots of action. So, tell me a little bit, what were you doing before your service and before you decided to enter?
Before I was in the service?
Yep, before you mentioned you were a paper boy, were you doing?
Yeah, well, there was 5 boys in the family. So these were Depression years. There was no handouts. My dad says, "You want to get some money, you go work. Get a paper route, do something." You know, there was no allowance money in those days because 5 boys, you wouldn't go, you know. And we were in the moving business and coal business. So as soon as we were of age, he put us to work on the truck. And I was driving semis when I was 16, just before I went in the service, and traveling all over the United States with a truck because there was a shortage of people. And so I went in at 17. My dad was mad because I was his one driver. But those are the days, you know, things were rough. You know, there was no, the economy wasn't good. There was 25% unemployment prior to World War II. The war was brought us out of the Depression, really, put everybody to work all at once overnight. All the factories in Milwaukee were busy, everything was working. It was all going to defense programs. So I didn't want to work in the defense plant, so I worked for the county park board for 6 months before I went into service because I wanted to be out in the open. I liked the fresh air. And basically that's what I did. And like I said, I was driving trucks when I was 15, 16 years old, and we all see at that age, kids today don't realize the large families, you had to go to work. That was your dad's, he was came from a farm, he was a worker, and he wasn't going to let us sit around. It was a different lifestyle. But I think it was a good one because it taught us a lesson right from the beginning. You know, it was something that stayed with you. And even in the service, you became an achiever. You just didn't do one thing, you did a lot of things. On a ship, you had 5 different jobs to do. In case one guy got hurt, you took his job. That was part of the whole program. It was a teamwork. And through that, I think it helped us throughout our life. When we had to make a decision, we knew how to do it. We didn't just sit around and let somebody else do it. We did it. And so that was part of my training.
So actually, funny that you speak about training. Why don't you talk a little bit about your early life and early week in the military, and kind of how you adapted to military life and training?
Well, as I went in, I went through amphibious training, and how I became a cook. That was strange. See, I was the engine man on a landing boat, and I was supposed to start the engine up for the ramp as we come in to make the landings. Well, I went over there, and it was a Wisconsin engine, and I was going to crank it, and another kid come up and said, "Hey, let me do that." I said, "Okay, go ahead." But he grabbed the handle the wrong way, and he came back and broke both bones right off his hand. And the skipper says, "Why'd you let him do it?" I said, "He wanted to." And he says, "Well, he was the cook's helper. You are now the cook's helper." I said, "You guys are all going to die." And that's how I was also the cook's helper, and I was the gunner too. So, like I say, I learned how to do a lot of things. So I cooked on that ship, and then when I went to China, I went on a larger ship. I went back on an LST that brought us over there, and I became the cook on an LST from 12 people to 130 people. And then when I came home, I went in a reserve program, and I started going on big ships like cruisers with 1,300 people, and I was the cook on that. And then I was on a battleship, and I was the head cook on that. So I had a lot of cooking experience in 10 years of service time.
So what would you say was the hardest part of really adapting in the beginning training?
Well, I think the thing that had bothered me most is going through where they put you through these here gas fields to check you to see if if they put out poisonous gas or something. They had to put a mask on and go through that, and that bothered me. I thought, heck, the mask might leak. But other than that, I think it was a challenge. You just did what you were told to do because you couldn't do anything else. They told you you're going to do it. You didn't refuse. It was a good training program.
All right. So as you kind of progressed, did you see any outstanding leadership examples and other examples of strong leadership while you were in the Navy?
Well, on a small ship, we had an officer. He was an ensign. He just came out of school. In fact, we had to teach him how to run the ship. He didn't even know how to tie up the boat. And, well, he was only 5 years older than me. And a couple of years ago, I went on a reunion, and I tried to find out where he was, and found out he ended up in Texas, but he had died 2 years before. He was 90 at the time. So I says, yeah, well, most of the guys that were on my ship are all in a cemetery because they were all older. I was the youngest guy on that landing craft. I was 17. In fact, I was only 19 when I came home from World War II, and the Army sent me a draft card. They wanted to draft me into the Army, and the Navy said, you stay with the Navy Reserve. That's how come I got back into Korea. I stayed with the Navy Reserve then because I wasn't going to go in the Army. So. But that's the way I did things. I made up my mind that I was gonna do it my way, not their way.
So did you come across any other strong leaders, anybody that really influenced you, or someone that was just really as a powerful leader?
Well, we always had some guys on the ship that were older that you kind of followed what they told you because you figured they knew what was going on. Some of the guys were 30 years old, where I was 17. I had met some guys that was old enough to be my father that were still in it. Well, they drafted up to age 45 in World War II, you know. Unless you had 10 kids and something else, you didn't get in a draft because, or you had a farm, they gave you a deferment. But other than that, they were drafted. We had 16 million people in World War II. And I think there's less than 1 million of us left now because of age. You know, the age group, most of them are over, if they're living, they'd be over 100 years old now.
Yeah.
You know.
So with those older guys, you mentioned that you listened to them and they kind of knew their stuff. Did you learn a lot from the older members of the crew, or more would you say from training?
Well, it was the training plus you kind of followed what they told you because you figured they probably had a little more experience than you. So, you know, you figured that was the best way to learn it. Follow, let them tell you, and you'll see if it's good or bad or what. You do it, you know.
Yeah. So, what would you say were some life lessons that you learned while you were in the Navy?
Well, I'd say the main thing I learned is that you got to know how to make a decision when things get rough. Because sometimes it would depend on your life, the decision you made. And I had those decisions to make in World War II, and I've made those decisions throughout my life, whether it was on a job or doing something. When things get rough, you think it out, and you do it. But you've been up against it, and so you kind of had a couple options what to do. You didn't do just jump and make a quick decision. You thought it out. And that's what I think trained me mostly, to figure things out when it gets rough.
So what were some of those decisions that you had to make in the Navy, for example?
Well, the first thing they trained me as a gunner is you've got to identify your planes and the enemy planes. And there's a silhouette of these planes that you, within 100th of a second, can identify. That's the way they trained you. That when you're going to fire on them, you better be darn sure it's the right plane. It's not your one of. See, our planes used to track these other planes and come after them, so we didn't want to shoot them down. And we were trained on Great Lakes. They did a tow target, and you always got to know how to lead the target before you hit them, you know. You let them fly into your shell, so you're ahead of them. And so we had pretty good training for all of that.
So I would assume that you had to make probably a lot of decisions when you were shooting.
Well, you made them, it was, you see, there was so many other ships that were firing at this. The one thing you wanted to learn is when a plane came down on the sort of water level, you had to cease fire because your shells would ricochet off and hit probably your own people. We had that happen at Okinawa. The one plane, we hit 5 of them, and the 6th plane got right down, and he flew right by me. I could see him, and he was heading right towards where we were a half hour before. The other ship was in the base, and he hit that right at the engine room. But in the meantime, we ceased fire. Some of the other guys kept shooting, and they injured and killed 51 of our own people on the other ship from our own shells. See, you make mistakes like that, and that's where you have to make a right decision.
So while you were in the Navy, did you have any like strange coincidences or some interesting occurrences? Anything really weird happen?
Well, I was at one place there. We were loading cargo, and this one LCT was loading a bunch of lumber. This was after the war ended at Korea, at Incheon Harbor, and they loaded a bunch of bombs under and then put the lumber on top, and they made a mistake. They put all this weight on these bombs, and it ignited. And the guy was in the harbor, and it blew up the ship, and not only that, it blew up a building right next to it. And the one kid run, and he ran behind the building, and the building fell on top of him. So, mistakes. But another time we were, funny thing, we had a radio on the ship to call headquarters, and one night we were tied up for the night and we didn't go back to port. And in the morning, somehow the ship swung around and it was foggy, and the next morning we were heading out to sea instead of the port because we didn't have knowledge of what was going on. We called on our radio and it was getting weaker and weaker. And finally I thought, gee, we're heading out to sea. And all of a sudden we seen a Korean fishing boat. Hey, the guy says, you're heading the wrong direction, go the other way. I had to laugh. Oh, we had some fun.
So speaking about fun, what was probably the best experience for you while you were in the Navy?
Oh, the best experience is when they pulled my name out of a hat and sent me down to China, Shanghai, for recreation. It's supposed to be a weekend. Well, we got down there, and for some reason the ship was delayed for 2 weeks, and we ran out of money. We didn't have any more money to spend in town. But every branch of service was in there at Shanghai at the time. The Russians were there, everybody was in there, and they started fighting the war all over in the taverns. So they put me on shore patrol to go and pick up these drunks. I had to laugh.
So you probably got pretty close with the guys on your ship. Did you
Oh, yeah.
keep in touch with them after?
Well, it was like a family with 12 guys. Were living on there for almost a year together. And being the cook, I had to figure out what these guys would like, try to, of course, we were with our rations and food. During the war, we had all this dried stuff that we had to add water to make food out of it, vegetables and stuff and milk and everything else. We had nothing. Very seldom we got fresh stuff because we were pretty much on our own most of the time. And then, of course, we talked to the natives, give us some fish once in a while. But we kind of made do. And one time, I don't know whether they sent us some billy goats or something from Australia. I looked at it, I says, no, maybe we can trade this off to the army and get some whiskey. But we were what we call a bartering. And they used to say, don't let them guys tie up, they're a bunch of pirates. They're always looking to steal something. So we more or less were on our own quite a bit.
So when you were helping the Army, did you would probably barter and trade a lot, did you?
Oh yeah, we kind of helped ourselves once in a while, because one time somebody left the cap to the water tank open and our salt water got in it, and oh man, our fresh water truck ship won't be here for a while. And the next load we had a load of beer to haul. So we kind of put away about 100 cases of beer so we wouldn't be without something to drink. So, no, another thing we never did, we never black marketed anything. But, you know, some of the guys did that to make money for themselves. In fact, I went aboard an LST in China, and the first thing I did, as the cook, I went down and checked all the supplies and found out the crew had black marketed to the Chinese most of the supplies. So I said to the skipper, I says, you got to order supplies. He says, well, what should I tell him? I said, tell him you hit a reef. I said, because we hit a reef with our LCT and the government sent us all the stuff we need. Yeah, I says, they've got plenty of stuff. I says, just tell them you hit a reef, do something. Well, he made the mistake of reporting this merchandise was stolen. Guess who they put in jail? Me. He turned around, and I'm sure that skipper was part of the black market because he tried to put the blame on me. And they held me for 30 extra days overseas until they were convinced I had nothing to do with it. But that's the tragedy of the war. And I had been on a small ship, and I took care of everything. I knew it, but everything was right up to snuff. You know, I kept records, and then when I came on that bigger ship, there was nothing but a bunch of crooks there. In fact, they cut my sea bag and stole all my valuables that I had saved. So that was one of the tragedies of the war. But other than that, I got along with everybody. I had no problems.
So what would you say would be your most important contribution while you were serving?
Well, I think the fact is I was willing to do almost anything to keep a ship going, and it was just it's been my effort all my life. I've never refused a job. I've never been out of work in all my life, and I've volunteered all my time since I've retired. So it's part of my lifestyle. I enjoy helping people and meeting people. In fact, even meeting the enemy was no challenge. We took prisoners on one island, and the Japanese, they had a box they were carrying, and I says, what's in the box? He said it was his buddy he had cremated, was taking him home. So that taught me a respect for people, you know. I thought, he's an enemy, but he's got respect. Because he was doing what his leaders told him to do, the same as we were told. So we had met Japanese, were educated in the United States, went back home and were put in the service. So they were more or less, they weren't suicidal, believe me, they were intelligent people. So you could see both sides of the fence. And I felt, no matter where you, even in your work effort, I was in unions, I was in management, but you got to work both sides of the fence. Everybody's got a problem. And if you can work through the problems, you can make things work. That's the point. And you have to learn what the problems are.
So you talked about taking prisoners and meeting the enemy. Did you meet the enemy a lot, or did you only take a couple of prisoners?
Well, we were more or less a ship that was sent out whenever they had bad weather. We would go out into the waves were so high it'd be almost like a submarine half the time. But we'd go to small islands that needed help. We were like a rescue ship. So we got involved in hauling all kinds of stuff and people. The funniest one is right after the war ended, we hauled a load of 400 nurses out to a ship. I said, man, never seen so many women in all the war. And we were hauling them, they were going home. They were Army nurses, and they loaded them on our ship, and we took them out to buy a big ship so that they could go back home. So experiences.
So did your ship go unscathed pretty much throughout the war? Were you hit by the enemy or?
Our biggest problem was the skipper made a shortcut one night and he run us up on a reef and tore the bottom out of one side of the ship. And we had a load of bridge steel on there, and I thought, oh man. So I opened the hatch and I said, Skipper, we got water coming in. And we called for help, and they sent another boat out, and they were going to tug us off. And just about that time, we got an air raid sign. And he said, we'll see you tomorrow, and they left us. The next morning, the tide went out, and we were sitting on top of this reef, and the water was running out the bottom of our ship. So we had to run around for 6 months listed because they couldn't get us in for a repair for about 6 weeks. And so we kept operating though. But it hit our supply hole, and all of our merchandise, all of our canned goods, and tore all the labels off the cans. We didn't know what we were eating for 6 months. Every time we'd open the can, the labels are all gone. But it was funny though.
So you weren't then hit by the enemy or actually?
Well,
just the reef?
one night we were cruising at night. We were going up to the one end of the island, and all of a sudden we see a blinker light off, and there was a cruiser out there, and he seen us in our silhouette. He didn't know if we were the enemy, and he signaled us, identify yourself. We got 8-inch guns aimed at you. Oh, he got the guy on the radio, better call them guys in a hurry, because they weren't messing with us. But we used to cruise a lot at night and go to different parts of the island, so it was kind of interesting.
So lots of traveling.
And I watched the battleships firing off the island there. They were firing these 16-inch guns, and that whole battleship would slide in the water when she'd fire these big guns. And then about a minute later, she'd hit about 8 miles into the island, and you'd see the whole blinking island shake. So it was something else. We must have killed 140,000 Japanese on the Okinawa. It was terrible. And 30 years after the war, they were still in the caves there, thinking the war wasn't over yet. Some of them were coming out of those caves. That's how loyal they were to their government.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So you mentioned volunteering after the war, and after you retired. What do you mostly volunteer for?
Well, I was on the board of directors for St. Vincent de Paul. I was in real estate for 40 years, so I said the thing for your stores, you need location. So they had a real dinky little store in Waukesha. So I says, I'm going to get you a bigger store. So we went and we covered the whole area and looking for a decent store. Well, the first one we put together was in Okachi or Oconomowoc. We found a Century store there that had just moved out, and we took over their store. And the guy says, why do you want this? I said, it's location, location, location. It's the best location. I said, within a couple miles, there's 30 brand new subdivisions, which will donate to our store. And I was right. That store is taking in $1 million a year now. That store in Oconomowoc. Then we opened one in Waukesha. We took over the last Kohl's food store that was left on Sunset. The building was only 10 years old. And I went over there, looked at it, and I says, the guy wanted $7.5 million. And I said, no, we can't afford that. But then he was leased out to A&P, who filed bankruptcy. In the middle of the summer, the guy called us back, hey guys, how about $3.5 million? I says, well, we'll think about it. I said to him, I went to a meeting, I says, we don't need 7 acres of prime land. let them have an acre back and get it down to 3 million. And we bought that. Store was only 10 years old, 50,000 square foot building with 6 acres of prime land on Sunset. And that store is doing real well for St. Vincent's. So that's part of my volunteer program. I helped them build those stores, and we help 11,000 people in Waukesha County in 1 year for rents and whatever they need. And that's part of the program that I do there. And then I do the Honors Flight fundraising program. I go to all of their events. And in fact, they had me down to the Admirals game to walk out on the ice and drop the puck to start the game. Had 14,000 people cheering me on. And Harley Davidson pushed that one for me, and I've been signing books at Harley Davidson place in Oconomowoc and raising money for the Honors Flight. So that's another program. And then I'm with VFW Post in Heartland. I've been there for a number of years. I'm their chaplain of the post, and I do whatever event they want me to do. In fact, we even come over here once in a while with our VFW post.
All right. Well, let's just kind of wrap it up. I see you brought some books and your photo book. So
Yeah.
what,
I'm going to give you these. You can give them out to your friends. That's part of their program.
all right. Those are very interesting.
Yeah. You'll find that we have reunions every year. And because of our guys, the last reunion I was at, it was only 13 World War II guys showed up, because there's a lot of them in the hospitals or they're in nursing homes, or they're not able to get around. I've been fortunate, I'm still getting around pretty good, and so I still enjoy life and try to help people out, and I hope I can do it for a few more years.
Hopefully. So these are all from your
These
from
are,
reunions?
we get these every month, every quarter they send us one out. And these are all the guys that are with our group. They give us all the stories where they were. And this is one that I was at Okinawa. That was 72 years ago. So we've got a lot of history.
Looks like it. So then what's in photo book?
Well, this is all part of my programs that I've done in different places. I've trained.
Wow, lots of pictures. So did you take a lot of these yourself, or?
No, some of them I picked up from other people. Some of them I had a camera, but you see, during the war, you weren't allowed to send any information home because of censorship. They'd take your letter and just ship it all apart. And they'd say, "Dear Ma, your son John," and everything else was cut out because you couldn't tell them where you were, what you were doing. It was all censored during the war. So that's why we couldn't get a lot of history. And then a lot of the guys didn't even want to talk about it. They came home and they said, "Forget this war." They were glad to get back. So it was hard to get the information. So we've been gathering information. When we have the reunions, we get these guys together and talk to them. I still have some pictures of my cruise and the different events that I was involved with. So I would manage to keep some of it, you know, and the islands that I was on.
Lots of history.
But I didn't have a camera like I have today, you know. Here's a calendar they made in Korea. But these are ships that I was on, different places, cities, Shanghai, China. And they also have dancing girls there too. I always used to like to dance when I was young. This is some of my St. Vincent de Paul group. And then the meetings I go to. This is part of my construction business I did. I built these apartment buildings. That was part of my job.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So do you do any type of hunting with vets or?
No, I have a veterans hunting group with my former boss. It's Veterans Afield, it's called, and we take them out duck hunting, pheasant hunting. We take them to a trap shooting, and we make sure they can shoot. We hook up with the Veterans Hospital for disabled vets that can hunt or would like to go hunting, and we take them out to these private hunting lodges. And we do probably 6 or 7 events every year. In fact, we'll be starting here pretty soon again. And we start first with the trap shooting, and then we take them out for pheasant hunting or duck hunting. And we've been doing that for the last 3 years now. So that, I don't know if I have any pictures. I also do photography. Here I was down at the Admirals game dropping the puck.
Oh, that is really cool.
Yeah. And then they had me stand up there and wave at the crowd.
Lots of fans.
Yeah. We also do a program with school kids. We go over there and they have a program, and I do the photography for that. This, I believe, is my hunting group here. Yeah. Wait a minute. Yeah, that's the ones that when I take them out trap shooting. And then we take the school kids out, we go over to their program at one of the grade schools in Heartland. We do a lot with the school kids over there. They want to hear about the war. I go there and talk to them.
Sounds like you get back a lot.
Well, I enjoy it, and they enjoy it, so it works out.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you personally for your service, and I know a lot of the people here want to thank you. So, in closing, this has been an interview with Mr. John Eskau regarding his service during World War II, Korea, and the Chinese Civil War for a small part. My name is Douglas Kirchhofer. The time is 5:49. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, sir. And most
You're
importantly,
welcome.
thank you for your service.